10 full seconds before a hand reaches out to pick up a heavy object, hidden networks in the prefrontal cortex have already calculated and locked in that exact choice. The everyday experience of free will is, mostly, a delayed neurological broadcast of an unconscious biological calculation. A decision made in the dark, long before the conscious mind takes credit. Today, we are going to look at how the skeleton executes a predictive masterpiece of its own. It turns out the rigid white frame inside a human is running complex math long before a muscle twitches. A femur resting in a museum display case looks like a piece of architecture. A dead strut of dry calcium. It behaves like limestone. It seems permanent. But a femur inside a living leg is closer to a liquid computer. Every time a heel strikes the pavement, the physical impact shoots up the limb, bending the thigh bone. The bend is microscopic. The width of a human hair. But it is enough. That tiny, violent deformation generates a spark. Fluid gets squeezed through microscopic canals hidden inside the bone matrix. This physical squeeze creates a faint electrical charge, signaling to millions of entombed cells that structural integrity is under threat. The frame is constantly anticipating failure. The consequence of this spark is profound. The bone gets thicker on the exact side where stress was applied. A professional tennis player develops a radically thicker serving arm. A marathon runner fortifies the lower tibia. The skeleton constructs a bulwark just where it is needed most, reinforcing the walls before the siege even begins. Only later did we understand how the body knows precisely where to build. Julius Wolff, a German anatomist working in the late 19th century, noticed this recurring pattern. He realized bone grows in direct proportion to the mechanical stress placed upon it. This means the physical structure supporting your weight at this exact moment is not permanent. Far from it. There is a precise, biological expiration date for the very bones holding you upright. A fixed, inescapable span of time required for the body to systematically dissolve the current skeleton and construct an entirely new one from scratch. While we track this invisible countdown, consider joining us and subscribing to the Minecraft to uncover more of the strange, silent operations keeping you alive. Because the machinery taking your frame apart does not care if you are ready. The demolition crew arrives first. These specialized cells are called osteoclasts. They are massive, multinucleated beasts that crawl blindly along the mineral surface of the bone. When they find a microfracture, a tiny flaw caused by merely walking down a flight of stairs, they seal themselves against the defect. Then, they secrete a potent acid. It is a concentrated cocktail that eats away the calcium phosphate, digging a microscopic pit into the solid frame. They dissolve the very foundation keeping the body in the air. This seems like a terrible idea. Why melt the pillars? Because a rigid structure is a brittle structure. An airplane wing that cannot flex will snap in severe turbulence. A skyscraper that cannot sway will collapse in an earthquake. The skeleton avoids shattering by constantly destroying its oldest, stiffest parts. It intentionally creates weakness to prevent catastrophic failure. Once the pit is fully dug, the osteoclasts undergo apoptosis. They self-destruct. Their job is done. The crater sits empty. Then comes the rebuilding phase. A new team, the osteoblasts, moves into the freshly carved trench. They lay down collagen, a flexible protein scaffold, and begin pumping it full of fresh calcium. They patch the hole, aligning the new material perfectly against the direction of the electrical spark that initiated the whole process. This patchwork repair happens millions of times a single day. It is happening in the jawbone as teeth grind against each other over lunch. It is happening in the ribs with every deep breath taken. The entire sweeping process works on a highly regulated, strict timeline. Every 10 years, you get a completely new skeleton. Not a single molecule of the femur carried around a decade ago is still present today. It has all been chewed up and repaved. But what happens if the mechanical stress suddenly stops? What happens to this brilliant, responsive masterpiece if you simply float away? Astronauts on the International Space Station find out very quickly. Without gravity pulling them down to a floor, the sharp impact of a heel strike vanishes. The tiny, microscopic bending of the bones stops completely. The fluid inside those hidden canals goes entirely still. The electrical sparks fade to black. Without that vital signal, the builder's cells stop working. They just go dormant. They pack up their tools. But the destroyers do not. They keep crawling over the matrix, pouring acid, and digging pits. They continue melting the framework, but now, no one comes behind them to fill in the craters. In the silent microgravity of orbit, a human can lose up to 2% of their total bone density every single month. The skeleton simply eats itself. It is a ruthless biological efficiency. The body refuses to maintain heavy infrastructure it does not actively need. Bone is remarkably dense. It requires enormous amounts of metabolic energy to haul around the surface of a planet. If the environment suggests that gravity has been permanently turned off, the body immediately begins downsizing the massive calcium budget. It is an elegant, undeniable logic. It is also completely devastating to a human trying to return to Earth. To stop this rapid decay, astronauts strap themselves to resistive exercise machines, running on treadmills with heavy bungee cords pulling them to the metal deck. They have to manufacture artificial gravity. They manually trick the skeleton into feeling a heavy load so the electrical sparks will fire again. Because Wolff's law is not a suggestion. It is a biological mandate. Look closer at the hidden architecture of the bone itself. Inside the ends of the long bones lies a network of spongy material called trabecular bone. It looks like a chaotic honeycomb. A sprawling mesh of fine calcium struts. It is not random at all. Engineers mapping the trabeculae discovered these struts align perfectly with the exact lines of mechanical force traveling through the joint. They form a pure mathematical optimum. Maximum possible strength achieved with absolute minimum weight. Gustav Eiffel used the exact same principles when designing the sweeping lattice of his famous tower in Paris. He built a massive, wrought iron femur. The iron tower stands rigid, slowly rusting in the rain. It cannot heal a snapped steel beam. The biological tower inside a leg, however, is always listening. Deep within that spongy bone, buried entirely in the calcium matrix, are the osteocytes. These are former builder cells that intentionally trap themselves in the hardened rock. They sit in microscopic caves called lacunae. They grow long, spindly arms that reach out through narrow tunnels, holding hands with their neighbors in the dark. They form an immense, interconnected sensory net. It is a secondary nervous system, hidden deep within the body. Just as the prefrontal cortex calculates the trajectory of a hand before it moves, this vast network of entombed cells calculates the shifting loads of the physical world. If a person gains 10 pounds, the buried network feels the increased pressure. If they take up the violin, the network senses the novel tension in the jaw and collarbone. It maps the invisible forces. It translates the friction of everyday life into a shifting biological blueprint. Every daily habit, slouched posture, slight limp, and heavy burden is recorded in the calcified diary of the frame. The skeleton is never just a passive scaffold. It is a slow-moving, crystalline reflection of the life lived around it. If this changed how you see your own body, subscribe. There is far more hidden inside you that we have not explored yet. A like and a comment genuinely help this channel reach more curious minds, and that support is what makes it possible to keep producing these documentaries. Tell us in the comments what we should explore next.